It didn't take long to confirm the rumours. Clan Obsidian is known for the slavish devotion of their followers, so it was a surprise when this job came to me. Yes, my reputation precedes me, but they couldn't find one shady scoundrel with a fast ship amongst all of their people? Really? And why bring me into the clan's home settlement for payment? Well, that was their mistake. For I'm not just shady, I am shade. I took this opportunity to see if the rumours of a power behind the power were true. The dim white dwarf in the sky made it easy to move about unseen. After some searching, I found something that could only be described as a place of worship. Inside was a vault like no other I'd heard of before. It was made of what appeared to be black iron and was in the shape of a large honeycomb. I slipped past the throngs of monastic types solemnly praying and made my way into the vault. If this was their secret, that secret would prove invaluable. So into the inner sanctum I went, finding only a horizontal slab of black iron at its centre. But now I'm surrounded, and I know what they are. Essentia. I think this vault is their hive, that slab is the dinner table, and it looks like I'm what's on the menu for tonight's meal. An actual play podcast where I, Matt Risby, and I alone, am playing through Ironsworn Starforged. This week's Tale from the Drift was from the magnificent Corey Mayo. Huge thank you to Corey, who has his own solo gaming blog where you can find plenty of actual play reports, including some Starforged, some Morkborg, some 1,000-year-old vampire. There's some Icarus in there too, all the good stuff. If you want to check out Corey's excellent blog, you'll find a link in the description below. And if you want to roll some dice and write something for me to read at the beginning of a future episode, then the submission guidelines and contact details are on screen now. And whilst I have you, why don't you leave a like, subscribe, and click that little bell icon so you can follow along with the campaign each and every week. So, last week, we kicked off Season 2, with Archer appearing through an iron gate. However, this iron gate was not built into the ground like the one he stepped into. This one was suspended in the atmosphere of a new planet, and as a result, Archer began the episode and the season plummeting at great speed towards said planet's surface. Luckily, there was a dense forest there to break his fall, and he used every branch available to do so. Battered and broken by his somewhat bumpy landing, he dusted himself off and acquaints himself with his strange new surroundings. He finds himself on a lush green planet, a verdant world teeming with sentient life. Beyond the forest where he made landfall are vast grasslands, and in the distance, a snowy mountain range. Using his scopes to scan for signs of intelligent life, he spies something inexplicable up in the mountains. A pair of giant stone reptilian figures carved into the rock, guarding what appears to be a man-made pass between the peaks. With nothing more to go on, he sets off across the plains towards the mountain pass in search of answers. We then see the events following the jailbreak on Sepulchre from Luna's point of view. She watches Archer disappear through the gate as he faced down Azrael Vega. She then flees with the conduit to the hangar, where Griff has the Eclipse ready to launch. They detonate the industrial hauler to cover their escape and get ready to jump into the drift. However, as they are about to do so, a strange craft arrives, which causes power outages in both the Eclipse and the entire junk fleet that has amassed in Varnholm's orbit. As Luna takes in the sight of this strange ship, the conduit reveals that its appearance heralds the arrival of the Soulbinders. And Luna says, "Okay, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but who or what are the Soulbinders?" And the conduit just kind of watches this ship pass. It moves slowly. It's ornate and decorative, has coloured glass in its portholes, look like stained glass windows. It's made of a lot of materials that are so rare, they're so expensive. And sections of the hull are are decorated in precious metals and mosaic tiles, and it's remarkably clean, spotlessly clean. It's the cleanest spaceship Luna or the Conduit has ever seen. And the Conduit says, any veteran spacer or long-run hauler will have stories. You ever see those old-timers with the whites of their eyes turned red? It's because they made too many jumps, gone void-blind in the drift. But those old-timers all have stories. And you hear one, you've heard them all. Ghost ships, dread fleets, haunted outposts, lifeless places in deep space inhabited by the risen, the restless dead. And everyone has heard them, from a guy who knew a guy who worked for a guy who once dropped into this sector off the charts and ran across some derelict crewed by the undead. I've been around, kid. I've seen things you wouldn't believe, and I've heard 1,000 old-timers tell the same old stories, but that is all they are. The dead don't walk. Once you're dead, you stay dead. There ain't nothing more to it. But we've just seen the Soulbinders drop out of the drift in a floating palace. I didn't even believe they existed until 2 minutes ago, but here we are. The dead don't scare me, but the Soulbinders do. And Luna is quiet for a moment. She takes in the scene outside before she says, we fought the dead, me and Archer. On a derelict, it pulled us in with a tractor beam. We worked our way through it, and the crew, they were all dead. But they weren't, they were risen. And the Conduit slowly turns and looks at her. Luna says, it can't have been more than a few days ago, I think. It was here in the breach. The Conduit is silent, deep in thought. And Luna says, what? And the Conduit says, I wish you hadn't just told me that. And this is where we are going to add a campaign clock. Now, these are relatively recent additions to the preview edition, and when I revealed on Twitter that I was still using the 9-month-old original PDF, which has been extensively updated since it was released, by the way, I was roundly mocked and teased for doing so. So I have updated that, and I thought that this would be a great opportunity to use some of the new features and stop being such a staunch traditionalist. I need to move with the times and embrace the new. So clocks are a way to count down to narrative moments in your story, to build to something bad happening in the background. Now, there's two types of clock. There are tension clocks and campaign clocks. Now, tension clocks tend to be something that measures something that's happening in a scene, for example. So, for instance, back in episode 2 of this podcast, if you can cast your minds back there, Archer found himself on the Creation, which was a ship that had an unstable chemical storage unit, I think. And that caused the ship to explode, and he saw that it was unstable, but continued to carry on with his exploration anyway, because he needed to find the databank. Now, the countdown to that detonation could have been, and probably would have been, had the clocks been in the preview edition at the start, measured by a tension clock, because that was kind of playing out over a scene or a series of scenes. But we're now going to add the other kind. We are going to add a campaign clock, which is counting down to something nefarious happening in the background of our story. Now, Archer is off doing whatever he's doing, and Luna and the Conduit are here in the background. And what we're going to do each week is we are going to keep checking in on them, and we're going to measure the progress of both that time and the growing threat they face with a 6-segment campaign clock. And I am going to focus it here in the background of the campaign. And I'm going to give it a description and a name without it being too specific. And I hopefully won't be kind of showing my hand a little by what I'm going to call it. So you'll have to just stay tuned to find out what is happening. So this clock is going to be a countdown to the Inquisition. And we're going to start that ticking right now. So we're going to fill in one segment this week. and we'll check back next week to see how that's going. But for now, back to Archer. So at the end of last episode, he was about to set off towards the mountain pass, and we were about to make the move, undertake an expedition. So it's a long walk across this kind of wide open grassy plain. There is a lot more to discover on this expedition, but for now it's a fairly straightforward route. There's no cover, there's no way to kind of do this and be circumspect, so I think we'll take shadow out of the equation. And it's also a long way. It's a journey that we can't do all at once, so we can't flat out run, so we can't do it at pace or at speed, so that rules out edge. So we're going to roll plus wits, because I think that staying vigilant is currently the only narratively appropriate option we have. So we are going to undertake the first section of our expedition, rolling plus wits. Okay, that is a weak hit. And a weak hit says you reach a waypoint, envision the location and mark progress per the rank of your expedition. On a weak hit, this progress costs you. Choose one, suffer costs en route, or face a peril at the waypoint and envision what you encounter. So, looking at our tracks, well, first of all, we'll mark progress. We'll take 2 progress on that. So, explore the mysterious pass in the mountains, 2 out of 10. So, looking at our tracks, things aren't desperate for us, but this is also only the first segment of the expedition, and I don't want to be burning through what scant resources we have too early. So, I think we'll face a peril. So, let's ask the Oracle. 85 is troubling visions or apparitions. Oh, really? Okay, troubling visions, you say. That appears to be right now, right in Archer's wheelhouse, because he seems to be having a few of these troubling visions of late. So, let's envision it. The rain is still coming down heavy. And Archer has collar of his jacket pulled up, head down, trudging through the mud. And the wind is blowing and the rain is stinging against his face, and kind of looks up every now and then and sees the glistening shells of the armadillo rat crabs as they kind of scuttle around in the grass. Through the rain, the mountains up ahead where he's going are barely visible through the squally showers that have rolled in. And then he takes a step and he hears the crunch of sand beneath his foot. And suddenly he's dry. He's not on a wet, grassy plain anymore. He's in an arid, rocky desert. His mouth and throat are parched. And he is stood in a familiar place. But a place he's never been. A place he has only seen in his visions. And it's quiet. So quiet. Until that quiet is punctuated by those familiar screams. Clearer this time, louder, nearer. And he turns around and he sees the glassy black iron spire once again. And he slowly approaches, and this time he can see it in more detail. He can see that shiny black glassy iron is kind of marbled with veins of white. And he reaches out his hand to touch it. But this time, another hand grasps his. A weathered hand, fused with metal. Black iron following the outline of where each and every bone in the hand would be. He looks up to see the hand's owner, but it's unclear. He reaches with his other hand and then stumbles forward into the rain. Grass blowing back and forth, slapping gently against his legs. And he looks back, and he's kind of walked a considerable distance and done so whilst being outside of himself. And he kind of shakes it loose from his head, or he tries to anyway, and kind of just feels like he's being relentlessly driven down by these conditions. The rain hasn't stopped. He just kind of needs some shelter for now. He just needs to not be so damp. No one enjoys this. So we have reached a waypoint. So let's envision it real quickly. So I think that maybe he's kind of been walking, and like I said, he's been outside of himself, but he hasn't been paying too much attention to his immediate surroundings. So let's just say that over to his left, there's this rocky outcrop that is kind of jutting out from where the grassland meets the trees. And it kind of sticks out at a 45-degree angle. So it looks like it could probably offer him some shelter. So, in fact, actually, no. Let's make this more interesting. It's not just an outcrop. It's not just rock. That's boring. Shall we say that this waypoint, this kind of rock formation that you can see, is some remnant or ruin of this civilization that has been here before? That may be the same civilization who left the stone lizards in the mountains? I think if this is going to be a waypoint, we should give it more flavour. I think we owe it to ourselves. So let's ask the Oracle. 96 is viewpoint. 49 is fortify. A fortified viewpoint. What is that? Like a watchtower? Like a lookout point? Okay, whatever this is, I think that it's a waypoint worth exploring. So what we're going to do is just that. We are going to make the move, explore a waypoint, which says when you examine a notable location, roll plus wits. Now, I know that we haven't yet established any of the details of what this place is yet, and we probably need those if we're going to explore it, but I think we make this explore move first and then envision what we find and fill in these blanks, which is a bit of a backwards way of doing it, but just roll with it. Let's do it. Okay, so roll plus wits. A weak hit says, you uncover something interesting, but it is bound up in a peril or reveals an ominous aspect of this place. Envision what you encounter, then take +1 momentum. So let's momentum first. So up to 4. Getting somewhere, clawing it back. Very nice. So we have discovered, as we reach our waypoint, what first appeared to be just a rock formation. But it seems to be now some kind of fortified watchtower, the exploration of which will reveal an ominous aspect of this place. So let's do it. So if it's a rock, shall we say, then it makes sense to be in the same style as those reptilian figures that we saw guarding the mountain pass. I think that makes perfect sense. So Archer is still somewhat dazed, shall we say, from that vision, and also kind of wiping the rain from his face, kind of just desperate for some kind of respite, some cover, some shelter. He just needs somewhere to stop and gather himself. And he looks over towards the tree line, and just up ahead through the gloom, he can see this rocky outcrop breaking out from the trees. And, to him, that looks like the Hilton. It's like a 5-star resort. So he puts his head down and he marches towards it, kind of looking for a bit of respite, looking for a bit of shelter from the conditions, which if they've turned, the rain is really coming down. And he reaches that rock formation. It's kind of a bluey grey rock. It kind of shuffles underneath the overhanging stone. And the respite from the conditions is very welcome. And he stops and he takes a breath, he takes a moment, wipes his face, maybe takes a drink from his canteen, and then he kind of maybe a little bit of food. Let's say he's got some kind of space trail mix or whatever in his pockets, and then he kind of checks his progress and looking back out along the grasslands to see how far he comes, and maybe he does some kind of outdoorsman type stuff, some kind of Crocodile Dundee stuff, kind of trying to figure out the time of day. I mean, he doesn't even know how long the days are here. Do I even know? Does anyone know? I don't. But what he does know is that in any situation, when it gets dark, bad stuff goes down. So being somewhere of relative safety would be definitely advantageous to Archer. So he needs to find somewhere safe to be before it gets dark. But he's finding it hard to see anything around because the rain clouds have closed right in. He's finding it hard to see the sun, to work out what time of day it is. So he kind of steps out back onto the grasslands and kind of see if he can catch a break in the clouds, and he stumbles over something. And he looks down, and it's just another rock. It's the same colour of rock as the thing he's just been kind of hiding out under. And he thinks little of it until he sees another rock next to it, then another, and then another, and he kind of follows them. And it seems like they are laid out in this kind of semicircle. And he stoops down to inspect one. And they kind of look carved. And they look carved to a point. Now, they're natural rock. It's what occurs in this landscape anyway, but someone has carved them to a point. And not all of them are intact. Some of them have been kind of eroded or like broken off. And this is a puzzling scene to Archer, because it seems very deliberate. And as he finds himself having wandered further off into the grass, he looks back at the rock. And now he can see it from a different angle. What it is, or was, kind of becomes clear. Because what appeared to be just a rock formation is actually a monstrously large stone reptilian head. And he had sought shelter inside its mouth. And those little bits of rock that were sticking out were, in fact, teeth. It was a semicircle of teeth of the lower jaw. And he moves in closer and he studies the rock. And he sees that the scales have all been carved into the stone, and not crudely either. There's some real intricate detail, but it's weathered. The details have been kind of softened by time and the conditions. Nature has kind of taken its toll on this thing as it's been out here exposed to the elements. The edges may have been smoothed down, but it's still distinctly reptilian, and it's definitely man-made. For what purpose, though? Now, Archer moves around to the other side of the head, and to his surprise, he discovers a set of stone steps carved into the rear of its head. So he starts to climb them. And he draws his pistol as he takes each step. And they're human-sized steps. And they're wide enough for maybe a single file of human-sized beings to use at one time. And he slowly moves up, and up to the top of this staircase. And he finds himself on top of the head. And it is deceptively high, maybe 4 stories from the grassland below. And he's nearly as high as some of the trees in the forest, which are a matter of meters behind him. And he's on top of this stone reptilian head. And where he's standing, the floor is kind of sunken into the rock. And he kind of realizes that the scales that have been carved up on the side of the head kind of form these defensive crenellations that run around the perimeter of this thing. It's this kind of weird, fascinating structure. And when you stand at the very tip of the snout, you can see for miles. On a clear day, you would be afforded like a much better view of what appears to be a valley. Even amongst like the cloud and the rain, Archer can work out the geography of this place a bit better. The grassland stretches along, and what he can actually see is that the mountains enclose the forest and the grassland on either side, and this grassland is the floor of a wide, long valley. But we rolled a weak hit. We have to discover something ominous about this place. So, what shall that ominous thing be? What shall we reveal? Other than the fact that we're on a weird stone lizard head. Let's ask the Oracle. Number 6 says, signs of life forms, power, or cunning. I'll be honest, I do not like the sound of that. So, what life form? So far we've heard some birds and insects, and we've seen what can only be described as armadillo rat crabs. But I don't feel like they had a powerful, cunning vibe. I personally felt like they were adorable. And I don't think that they were plotting some kind of ill fortune upon Archer. Or are they? No, they're not. I don't think so. So, it's got to be something else. It could be the civilization that carved all this stuff. It could be another animal, maybe. Maybe if it's another animal, could it be tied into this whole reptilian aesthetic, possibly? I think maybe it is. That's my hunch. That's what I thought immediately after rolling that. But we're just dealing with something being suggested. Like Godzilla isn't suddenly going to show up, which is a shame, I grant you. But we do have a tone to maintain here, and I think that might be stretching it. So what could this ominous sign be that Archer observes from up on this little stone reptilian watchtower? Now, he's looking down onto the grasslands. So from where he is, maybe footprints? Maybe like some tracks of some much bigger extant creature, perhaps? Maybe? Let's go with it. Okay, so, yeah, Archer is surveying this scene. He's kind of like looked over this odd structure, and it kind of confirms to him, actually, that what he saw up in the mountains was real. Like, it gives him some kind of comfort that he hasn't just hallucinated these giant rock lizards. Because he's already hallucinating enough, so it's good that this isn't part of that problem. And the rain is still pounding down, meaning the visibility isn't great. But he can use his vantage point up here to kind of get a better sense of his surroundings. And whilst he's up there, something catches his eye down in the grass. And he looks, and it appears there seems to be a path that has been kind of cut through the grass. Actually, not cut, kind of flattened down. And he strains to see, but he's pretty sure he can definitely make out some deep impressions in the ground. So he kind of hustles back down the steps and out onto the plain before he kind of stops and cautiously approaches where the grass has been pressed down. And yeah, in amongst the flattened grass, the mud has all been churned up, and something has left a series of very large, very deep footprints. Now, they aren't fresh, judging by how much rainwater has filled the footprints. But also the fact that so much rainwater has filled them means that whatever left these was very big and very heavy. So what kind of prints are these going to resemble, do we think? Well, I'm just going to say there are 4 toes on each print. There are 2 at the front, quite long and wide. There's like a small stubby thumb. Looks like it's pointing on the instep. And then another toe, not as long as the one that's at the front, but it's at the back, kind of pointing straight back to where the rear of this animal would be. And Archer is kind of crouching down next to these prints in the rain, kind of mulling over what this means. And kind of looks and he sees that the tracks lead straight across the plain and seem to head towards the forest lining the other side of the valley. And he kind of turns back to where he's just come from and traces them back that way. And he kind of guesses that whatever left these tracks emerged from the forest near the watchtower. Now, Archer hasn't got the greatest of memories when it comes to dealing with local wildlife, and he is in no hurry to encounter any more strange creatures that want to eat him. So what I think he's going to do is just push on. And I think that with everything he's just seen, the tracks in the mud, and, you know, the route that this creature seems to have taken, I don't think he's going to want to hang around in this spot particularly. But he also reasons that being not seen is probably better than moving quickly. So I think he is going to try and move through the woods instead of across the grassland. I think he's going to undertake kind of this next leg of the journey kind of just inside the tree line. Whatever made those tracks came from the forest where he's now in. So he thinks that if there's just one of them, at least it's not in the forest now. So that's a small comfort to draw from. So he's just going to hang on to that. And what we're going to do is we are going to start the next leg of this expedition. And we are going to do so being more circumspect and being more clandestine. So we will do so rolling plus shadow. A strong hit. So on a strong hit, you reach a waypoint, envision the location, and mark progress. And take +1 momentum. So momentum up to 5, which is moving dangerously into useful territory, which is nice. And also let's mark progress. So we are up to 4 on our expedition. So I think from a narrative standpoint, this waypoint that we discover, I think it needs to be where Archer spends the night. So I will use this strong hit to reflect that and to say that narratively he has found somewhere safe to rest. So we just need to figure out what that place is, what kind of form it takes. And to do so, we will ask the Oracle. She hasn't let us down so far. So let's see what she throws up. 91 is transport. And 70 is obscured. Obscured transport. So somewhere we can be safe that is obscured and a transport. So, okay, I think I know. So let's set the scene. Archer has been nervously picking his way through the trees and anxiously scanning across the grasslands and also looking back into the forest around him for threats. And he keeps this up for an hour, maybe 2 hours. It's hard to track time here when you don't really have any kind of conception of what a day's cycle looks like. But it's getting late. And the rain has ceased, which comes as some relief. But the night is drawing in, and it is starting to get real gloomy. But he knows he's just got to keep going because he can't make camp in the woods or out on the grasslands because he would just be like completely exposed, completely vulnerable. So he has to keep going. He has to keep trudging through this forest. And he just knows that very soon he is just going to be plunged into complete darkness. And this goes on, and he's about to kind of give up hope until he sees something. And it's something that's above him, up in the trees. And it's sort of silhouetted against the pale grey of this planet's biggest moon. And in amongst the trees, Archer can see a craft of some kind, and he swears it's a spaceship. So he takes his staff from his back cracks it in two to fire up the flashlight. And he's right. He's 100% right. Wedged almost perfectly at a horizontal angle between two giant trees about 7, maybe 8 meters above him is what is left of a spaceship. And it's more specifically a transport shuttle with these little porthole windows running along the length of the hull, or what remains of the hull. And it's been there for some time, judging from the moss and lichen that kind of covers most of it. It obscures whatever markings it would have had, so there's no way of telling where it comes from. But also, Archer doesn't really have any time and is in no mood to conduct some kind of forensic investigation on this scene. He just wants to get up there. He just wants to get off the ground, get out of sight, get safe. So he starts to climb. And these giant trees have bark that is really craggy and kind of offers good hand and footholds, which allows Archer to make short work of the climb, and he gets up there quickly and easily. And the branches are sturdy enough to take his weight as he leans in to try and get a closer look inside. As he kind of swings his flashlight across the interior of this ship, he kind of spooks this nesting flock of birds that have made this place their home, and they kind of flap and flutter and squawk in protest as they fly out of the opening that Archer is looking in through. And it turns out that the opening he's looking in through is where he thinks that this ship must have broken in two. And this looks like the front end of the ship. And the cockpit is furthest away from where he is now, where he's looking in. I think in this universe, I think Archer might know it as what's called a rock hopper, which is a light, small passenger ship that ferries people between orbital settlements and planet-side settlements, for instance, or between planets that are very close together. They're kind of light, they're fast, they don't carry a whole bunch of passengers, but they get the job done. And whilst it's been here for some time, and the birds and maybe some other arboreal creatures have made themselves at home, it seems structurally sound, which is some relief. And it's also an odd thing to say that something is structurally sound when half of it is missing. But what I mean is it's wedged in there pretty good. And Archer tries to kind of like test how stable it is when he puts both feet in it and kind of rocks it back and forwards to see if there's much give. And there isn't. It is sturdy. It's not going to come loose. And he figures that this is as good a place as any. It's dry. He can probably get a small fire going if he wanted to. He'll be safe here. Probably. And finding this ship actually does two things for us. Firstly, it's somewhere relatively safe for Archer to rest up. And secondly, it tells Archer that this place has been at least visited by people with advanced technology, people with spaceships. And there's not much left in this thing that offers any obvious clue as to how it ended up here or who was flying it. But it's here. And the fact that it's here is of some considerable comfort to Archer. And I think that given everything that Archer has been through in the last few days, that he is quick to trust in that comfort. And within a few minutes of lying down, curled up in a little ball amongst the detritus, amongst the dead leaves, the lichen, the feathers and the twigs left by the previous occupants, I think within a couple of minutes Archer has fallen into a deep, deep, deep sleep. And thinking about it, this is really the first break that Archer has caught in a while, right? So I think that we're going to use this opportunity to make a move, and that move is going to be Hearten, which says, when you socialize, share intimacy, or find a moment of peace, roll plus heart. And this is definitely a moment of peace. Even though this is a strange land and there are clearly odd things afoot, this has been the first rest that he has had since that fitful night's sleep before the prison break, before they busted the conduit out. And that could have been yesterday. He has no real conception of how long ago that was. He doesn't know what effect stepping through the Iron Gate had on him and what effect it had temporally. He's been launched through space and time, but like how much space and time? He's on another planet in another place. Who knows how far it is from the gate he stepped through? How long's passed? Is it an hour? Is it a day? A month? A year? He has no idea. But for now, he doesn't think about it. He just rests. He finds some peace. And we are going to roll plus heart. And he clearly doesn't find that much peace, because that's a miss. And on a miss it says, you take no comfort, and the situation worsens. Pay the price. I somehow knew this was too good to be true. But that's the bad spot, I guess. Okay. How does the situation worsen? Archer snaps awake. And as he sits up, his body screams in complaint as it remembers the crash landing from earlier. And he's momentarily confused as to where he is and how he got here, but he gets his bearings. And it's still dark outside, and he was so tired. Why is he now awake? And the rain has returned, and it's kind of drumming on the metal hull outside. And Archer kind of uneasily moves over to the portholes, which are facing down and back towards the grassy plains. And he uses his sleeve to wipe the filth from the glass so he can see out. And it takes a moment for his eyes to adjust to the gloom. The rain is still coming down, but he can see this shimmering sea of grass in the pale moonlight. And then there's a brief flash of lightning, followed almost immediately by a deep, low rumble of thunder. And he figures the storm is pretty close. It's right on him, but it'll pass. He rubs his tired eyes and continues to strain to see outside, see through the darkness. And then there is another flash of lightning, which is when Archer sees it. Out amongst the grass. A creature. A creature that must have left the tracks he saw earlier. A creature that seems to be stood over something that it has just dropped. Something that looks to Archer a lot like the back half of a small transport shuttle. Thank you a million times. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you have not done so already, and click the little bell icon so you can be notified the next time an episode drops. I'll be back next week, and until then, it's farewell and safe